College football nerds here talking preseason top 10. That's right. We are actually in the season now, so we can talk top 10 and not just team previews and hypothetical offseason crap. We are talking about actually how we would rank teams in going into week 0. And Josh and I disagree, so your homework in the comments after you hear me explain why I like preseason polls is to tell me whether or not we should do away with preseason polls entirely or if we should do it my way. Josh, I'm going to let you go first and tell me why you hate preseason polls. You said you were the cantankerous one on this one, so go ahead.
I don't like preseason polls because I don't like to rank teams unless I feel like I know where to rank them. And for me doing this ranking, there's a lot of assumptions I'm making. And especially in this current era of transfers, I don't know where the heck to put teams. I mean, there's a team that's not going to show up on either one of our lists, and that's LSU. LSU had 26 players, by my count, most recently, that transferred in and out of that program. So I don't have a darn clue what that team's going to look like. And even teams that we're previewing have 3 to 5 transfers starting for them. So it just makes it incredibly difficult to try to get a good gauge of where teams are at. And, you know, look, all right, I'm an engineer, so I have no joy in my life, and I'm an attorney, so I had to give the rest of the joy I had and turn it over to the bar in order to get my license. So I don't really like fun. I just like being right. And for me, preseason polls are a chance to be wrong, so it just bothers me.
And I think that one of the problems that the viewers might have, but that we all have with preseason polls, is that typically the media does these preseason polls and coaches do theirs as well, and they don't shuffle them enough from week 0 to week 1 to week 2 to week 3. What they try to do is take results and back them into their preseason poll. So they start the preseason poll as something that matters, even though it's not based on data, and it carries more weight throughout the year for at least half the season, more weight than actual data on the field. And as long as somebody won, even if they struggled against a crappy team that's in their preseason top 10, top 25 or whatever, they stay or move up. And I hate that. I like preseason polls the way we do them, Josh. And I think that a lot of people would really like them if everybody did them this way, in that we're giving these top 10s now with the admission that it's really a crapshoot. And we're going to adjust them wildly week to week. So everybody says we shouldn't do polls until week 4 or week 5 or whatever. I think that as long as you're moving them around and they don't really start to settle in until week 4, week 5, preseason polls are fine. That's why I like them, because there's something to talk about. It's a discussion point. It's the off season. We need something to talk about. So I think for that reason, if you do them this way, then they're a fun discussion point, and they don't mean a whole lot because you're going to adjust them dramatically after the first week. So with that, Josh, give me your number 1.
My number 1, and the first few here aren't going to shock anybody. My number 1's Alabama. They bring back as much talent as anybody in the country. Offensively, they have the reigning Heisman Trophy winner. I don't know that I currently like their offense quite as much as Ohio State, just because I don't think the skill position talent is as proven as what Ohio State has. But I expect them to take a big step forward on the offensive line. They're still very good offensively, but more importantly, their defense stands to step back up and is as talented as any of the best defenses Saban's run. The combination of defense and offense that they have is just, in my view, not something that anyone else in the country really quite has. And so that's why they're my number 1.
I've got Alabama number 1 as well, for all the reasons that you just said. I think that Saban was right in saying that it was a rebuilding year. Alabama fans, we did an Alabama preview. You might want to check it out. He was right to say that for a lot of reasons. If you think about what they lost off of that 2020 roster and a lot of new faces, those guys have experience now. They absolutely killed it in the transfer portal. They're winning that game where A&M won the NIL recruiting, thing. Ohio State is winning the existing player NIL thing. Alabama is winning the NIL/transfer thing. I've got them number 1. I've got Ohio State number 2. which might frustrate some Georgia fans given that they won the national championship last year. But I've got Ohio State number 2 for a lot of the same reasons that Alabama is number 1. They're just below Alabama in my mind. I need to see them prove that they can be defensively that, 2018 to 19 jump. Although Ohio State fans are telling us that we're going to see the same thing because Knowles is bringing a proper scheme in place, good coaching, the personnel is there. I believe them. I just want to see it. Trust but verify. So right now, number 2, but obviously one of the elite teams in the country.
Ohio State's also my number 2, and it's for the same rationale. I don't think there's too much interesting things to say. It's funny, we did a preview of Ohio State as well, and in that preview I called it something of a rebuilding year, which they've kind of mocked. But Saban called last year a rebuilding year for Alabama, and they were in the national title. And I think it's a very similar thing for Ohio State. There's actually a lot of pieces that turned over, and they've got a lot of guys that have played some on defense, haven't necessarily started a full season. And you're kind of hoping they all come together and gel, and I think to a certain degree they will. But, when you're Ohio State and Alabama, every year to a certain degree is rebuilding year, and they've got the pieces to be really successful. I just think it's more a question of whether they can get them in place fast enough and whether they have enough consistency. Definitely first world problems. So what's your number 3, Daniel? I think I have a guess.
Yeah, number 3 is Georgia. We did a Georgia preview as well. I think that the question mark for them is whether or not they can return they can fill those gaps that they lost on defense and maybe take a next evolutionary step offensively, because we saw in 2 games last year, they really needed more offense than they had. Georgia fans don't want to hear that. We were big Stetson Bennett fans. But they need to be able to put that 40 burger on an Alabama at some point, and I don't think that they're quite there yet from last year. If they want to win it all this year, they need defense to not take too big of a step back and offense to take a slight step forward, and then they'd be my number 1.
Same here. It's hard not to have Georgia number 3. Defensively, I fully expect them to reload. The biggest thing to me is I just don't know what that defense is going to look like. They lost tremendously talented players, but they're also recruiting at a level where you can replace them. I've just got to see them play. I got to see them play at least once before I put them much higher than that. Offensively, I think they were an efficiency machine. We talked all year last year about how they were really underrated in terms of scoring points per drive. They were consistently top 5 nationally, but they just played at a slower pace, so people didn't see as high a number at the end of the game. They didn't understand how good it was. Those components have come back for the most part. I expect them to be very good. And then I'll say this now. This is where it gets difficult, right? Because we've been talking to a lot of analysts on Twitter back and forth in the offseason. It's kind of where we live during the offseason for various reasons. The jump this year in particular from 3 to 4 is huge. And I think Framo said it, and I know Kelly Ford Ratings has talked about it. Most metrics have between a 7 and a 9 point, whatever you want to call power rating, but a 7 and 9 point advantage between their number 3 and their number 4. And there's about a 7 or 9 point advantage between number 4 and somewhere around 18 to 20 is the next tier. So you've got 2 tiers. Usually there's 3 tiers here. You've got a tier 1, a tier 2 that's 5 through 9, and then a tier 3. And at least in the preseason, we got 2. It's 1 through 3, big gap, 4 through 18. And so the list of teams I had to consider from this point to the rest of the list was pretty darn long.
And that's Josh's way of saying you can't blame us for being completely wrong 4 through 10. And, I kind of like that. Number 4, I've got Michigan. I think nationally, AP, they're 8th, which is silly to me. Look, I get that maybe Michigan takes a step back this year or whatever, but until we see them play in a way that's going to be a step back, we can't assume it. And the rest of this list doesn't have the hardware that Michigan got last year, right? And that hardware is 2 things. 1, beating Ohio State soundly, and 2, winning the Big Ten. So I think that I think that people are underselling Michigan this year, and it's a little weird. They got a lot of pieces coming back. Yes, they lost some pretty big ones in the draft, but a lot of that core offense is still there. So for me, I've got Michigan number 4.
For me, I have Clemson number 4, and I think Clemson's really flown under the radar nationally this year. Offensively, they were bad. I don't expect them to be great this year. The receiving core still doesn't look like a group that's going to wow me. But the offensive line was a huge issue. I expect them to get at least somewhat better this season. I like Shipley. I still think DJU has a lot of potential. And if he doesn't, there are a lot of people out there that believe Klubnik has the potential to take over as a freshman. Obviously, 2018, it's not unprecedented for Clemson to do that. And, if it is DJU that's the problem, I think they can turn it around. And that matters because the defensive side of the ball, they are stacked. They've got multiple. Just Murphy and Brazee are probably the most dominant duo of players that not enough people know of nationally. I love those linemen. They just weren't healthy last year enough to make the kind of impact they should have. The back 7, really loaded group. Actually, little brother, one of my friends of mine, actually plays for him in the back 7. Really, really good group of players, really talented group. And I think they're going to, if they can do anything offensively to pair with that defense, they're going to be a top team. And I think easily the biggest possibility of a team to sneak into that elite tier from the remaining group of teams on the list.
So for my number 5, we get into really what is confusing for a lot of people because they're used to how normal or how AP ranks, how coaches rank. And that's if you lose, you go down. If you win, you go up or stay the same. And we had this issue with Texas A&M in 2019 where they played number 1 like 3 times, number 2 or like 1 through 4. I think they had 4 or 5 games that were in that 1 through 4. And so they couldn't be ranked because according to the AP, if you can't beat number 1, at least in 3 or 4 tries, then you're not good enough to be number 25. They got a pretty decent Miami team out of conference. They got Appalachian State as their kind of cupcake game. Then they go Arkansas, Mississippi State, Alabama, South Carolina, Ole Miss, Florida, Auburn, cupcake, then LSU to end the season. That's crazy, y'all. And it's not just that there's only one maybe elite team in that run. It's that there's a lot of good teams all together, and that's just really tough, and it takes its toll on the team. So I've got Texas A&M at number 5 in terms of teams with talent and coaching and ability. They probably won't be number 5 at the end of the year because of this schedule and because of how silly AP voters are. They'd rather vote somebody up ahead of them that plays no top 10, maybe no top 25 teams, but has a cleaner record.
Yeah, I have them number 5 as well, and there's a lot of maybe blind positivity in that, but I do think the roster has a potential to take a step forward. The freshmen that they landed last year are crazy. I think it's, the top 5 of the top 6 defensive linemen in that last recruiting class. Somebody from that group, probably multiple guys, like Walter Nolan or somebody else, is going to end up being an immediate impact guy. And if you have those guys in the defensive line of scrimmage, you have a chance to be really successful. Evan Stewart's made a lot of noise as a 5-star freshman and wide receiver. I think those guys are what makes them have the opportunity to be the number 5 team in my list. I still don't like the offense overall in terms of returning talent. I don't like the amount of turnover on defense. I don't like the fact that you lose guys like Leal and Wiedermeyer that were just so important cogs. And look, this team is going to go as far as Haynes King can carry them. And I know King got hurt last year, but I'm also not 100% sold from what I saw in the spring game that their quarterback play is going to be a whole lot better. So that's still an open question, but call it blind hope, which is about as much as I have for anybody at this point.
The one positive I would say for that quarterback room is that Calzada, even though he had success and, led the team last year, transferred immediately. So that's usually a good sign. Number 6, I've got Clemson. I agree with you in everything that you said. People are sleeping on this team because of the year they had last year. And it wasn't just the losses. it was the close wins, the one-score wins against really bad teams. I think Georgia Tech was one of them, a team that they should have, in terms of roster and just overall capability, should have beaten them by 3 touchdowns. I think that people are sleeping on Clemson. And Josh, I think people are sleeping on DJU. I think that I feel like he just wasn't ready last year, and that's not the same as not being good enough. But they'll figure it out at quarterback. So give me your number 6.
My number 6 is Michigan. A lot of the same reasons you discussed. We did a full preview on Michigan, so you should listen to that if you want to hear more. The short version, as we said, is we felt like Michigan was probably being underhyped, and Notre Dame was probably being overhyped. Michigan has a solid roster. They've got a lot of the same pieces that made them successful last year. And I think there's just this assumption that they have to go back to being Harbaugh, Michigan, losing 3 games. I don't ever buy that kind of logic. I don't really care what happened 3 years ago. So that's why I have Michigan number 6. So who's your, I just saw where you posted your list, and I'll go ahead and say, I think we both have the same number 7. So our number 7 for both of us, spoiler alert, it's Oklahoma, right? So do you want to talk about why we have Oklahoma number 7?
I just think that Venables is a guy that was ready to come in and be a head coach and to either maintain or improve culture, inherited a pretty good roster. This is not a situation where he inherited a roster that was a disaster, and that's partly why the coach left, or was run out of town because they had been going 4-8 every year. Like, he didn't get that. He's not got that at Oklahoma. I think that it's got a pretty good quarterback situation. And, if we're thinking about how the AP likes to rank people, I think there's a lot of kind of easy wins on their schedule. I'm not super high on the Big 12 this year. So, yeah, I like Oklahoma at number 7.
I mean, I agree with all that. I think at the end of the day, Oklahoma has the potential to take a little bit of a step forward under Venables. I think they're going to be fine at quarterback. They didn't get great quarterback play last year by most people's understanding, at least consistently great quarterback play. So why do you think a transfer quarterback is going to be worse? I think Gabriel could be very successful. And if they just improve a lot defensively with the talent that they have on offense, they could be a great team. I'm going to go ahead and move on to my number 8. And this is where you say the Big 12, we're a little down on the Big 12. But it sort of pairs why I think we both have Big 12 teams here. And that's Baylor for me at number 8. I think, look, we talked for years that we thought Aranda might have been the best coordinator in football. We thought he was the best defensive coordinator in football. Very organized guy. I am fully believe that Aranda's structure and organization and coaching was maybe 80% of why LSU was so successful for years, because I think he was kind of keeping things held together behind the scenes. And I think you saw at Baylor immediately why so many people had him so highly regarded. I think they've got a good roster again. They've done some things with transfers to plug holes. I think Baylor is going to be very competitive this year, and maybe it remains to be seen, but they look, in my view, they look like they're pretty well leveraged to try to use this new era to stay pretty high up in the rankings. Who you got as number 8?
Number 8, I've got Oklahoma State. I don't love Baylor. I love Aranda. I don't love... Look, Baylor beat Ole Miss last year barely. I think it was either tied. Yeah, it was tied going into the fourth quarter, and Ole Miss lost their quarterback in like the first or second series of the game. They won that game with Bohannon going 7 for 17 for 40 yards. And I know he's gone, but they had a lot of ugly games. I think they beat Texas State by 9 points last year. Like, I like Baylor. I want to see them be dominant, not win a bunch of 24-21 type games before I think that they're going to be consistent year to year. I like that Oklahoma State has a lot of returning production. Spencer Sanders is a good, not elite quarterback, but he's good. Got some pretty good production coming back at wide receiver. Got, a good running back coming back. I think that's a team that kind of knows how to win and isn't... Josh, I think maybe I'm counting on Baylor being who they were last year is not a flash in the pan, but maybe taking a step back this year. And Oklahoma State filling that spot, especially with the returning production. Give me your number 8 or number 9.
Yeah, and to be clear, I mean Oklahoma State and Baylor were kind of fighting for that pole position last year in the Big 12, so it's I think pretty reasonable to be split on which one's going to be in that position this year. My number 9 is Florida. Um, Call it a vote for hope from Napier. That was a team that's supposed to be a lot better last year and somehow wasn't. We did a preview for the Utah Florida game. We talked a lot about Florida in there, and I talked a lot about why I have some latent positivity. I thought last year, I thought their roster had a lot of holes. I thought Richardson wasn't ready to start at quarterback. Took some heat from that for Florida fans. I don't think I was wrong on any of that, but by the same token, I think the guys they need to fill those holes have started to mature. And yeah, I mean, I think they are positioned well to take a big step forward under Napier. And there's kind of a big hole in the SEC for the number 2 team in the SEC East, be it Tennessee or Florida or somebody. Somebody's got to be number 2 in the SEC East. And if someone can sort of take that bull by the horns, you're going to end up ranked pretty high. And that's where I have Florida sort of slotted in.
It's funny because we had this discussion kind of when we were filling out our top 10 of, is the second place team in the East, like, where do you rank them? Where do you put them? Because to your point, somebody's got to fill these gaps. And if you're the second best team in the East, just by definition of that, you've got a pretty good record. So I don't think it's crazy. I just think that Florida probably drops one between Tennessee and Kentucky, and then drops one, obviously, to Georgia. And the Utah game is not a foregone conclusion. I've got USC at number 9. They basically took a ton of good players from Oklahoma, coaches from Oklahoma, and players from other parts of the country in the transfer portal. I've got them at 9 because I do think, as much as I have problems with how Lincoln Riley handled the Oklahoma situation from an ethical standpoint, I think he's a good coach. I think he's the kind of coach, if we're talking about coming into a situation that's not been good and getting a lot of easy, low-hanging fruit kind of wins organizationally, not wins on the field, but just wins within the locker room, schematically, finding ways to modernize the offense and find some wins on the field. He's good for that. I just think he has a ceiling, but I think his ceiling is higher than 9th. My concern with USC is going to be the line play this year. Are they going to be able to hold up on both sides of the ball there? But for now, I think that he's got at least the skill positions to get enough wins to maybe finish in the top 10.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm really ready to put USC that high. I mean, they finished 112th, 1-1-2 in the country in yards per play defense last year. And Lincoln Riley has a great reputation as an offensive mind, but he doesn't have a great reputation for having great defenses. And so I think USC is going to be a good team that's probably going to beat some good teams in flash, but I just don't see the defense being good enough or consistent enough to make my top 10. My top 10 is a different Pac-12 team that I think does have the potential to have a great consistent defense to pair with a great physical offense, and that's Utah. I'm sort of splitting the baby a little bit, if you can't tell. And we did a preview also of the Florida-Utah game. This might tip where I'm at a little bit on that one, but the fact that it's close should also tell you something. I think Utah's a great football team. I think Whittingham has built a really tremendously successful program. I say successful is not the right word. A really solid, well-built program that is set up well to have long-term success. If they can find a way to really translate that in recruiting and NIL, which you're going to have to do if you want to sustain that level of success, and especially if you want to take the next step. But of all the teams I looked at on the rest of the list, to me, Utah seemed the most well-positioned, or the most consistent, the most all-around best to fill that number 10 slot. And again, man, you could, if you want to flip a coin and tell me anything from 11 to 25 should be where Utah's at and somebody else should be 10, I'll buy it, man. The ability to rank is brutal, but that's just where I came out for my top 10.
Just one note on your 112th defense. 102nd best defense was good enough for Lincoln Riley to make the playoffs in 2018. And it's funny because Oklahoma fans killed us when we pointed that out and said that, Alabama was going to put up a number on them, and they thought that, well, they got mad at us, but it was 28-0 in the first quarter. So I've got Michigan State in number 10. This is another team like Michigan where I think a lot of people feel like last year was an exception to the rule, but I'm really high on Mel Tucker, and I think that Michigan State is poised to, even if they take a little bit of a step back, they're still a team you don't want to play. And to me, maybe their final record might not reflect top 10. But I think that in terms of the 10 teams that you don't want to face, they'd be up there for me, at least in the preseason, because I haven't seen who they're going to be yet. I've got them at number 10.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I'm always excited to see the year start. And to me, I think this could be a really fun year for college football. I'm not really sure at this moment whether somebody's going to be able to challenge the top 3 teams. And look, yeah, sometimes you have a team like Clemson last year that bombs. But just as often, the top teams stay the top teams the whole time in college football. That's what makes college football different than college basketball. But the fact that we've got this big, maybe 15 to 20 team wide group of teams that can all beat each other does mean this should be an excited regular season. Hopefully it means these opening week games are going to be really fun. And I think it could be, I don't think it's going to be playoff craziness. It's not going to be I don't think you're going to see 2007, right, where you don't know who's going to be in the playoff at the last minute. But in terms of who's going to be ranked number 5 week to week, I think it could be absolutely crazy. And hey, I'm all for it. I think it's going to be a blast, and I'm really looking forward to, over the next 2 or 3 weeks, trying to get a grasp of where all these teams are at.
Yeah, and Josh Pate kept saying last year that it was a renaissance season because of all of the craziness. Alabama losing to A&M and Ohio State losing to Oregon early, and just it was fun all the way through. Now, we did have Alabama and Georgia in the national championship game, but we got to enjoy everything else along the way. And even in 2007, for all of the crazy and late, situation with Missouri, and I can't remember, I think Kansas had something to do with it. LSU and Ohio State played for the national championship. So some kind of known brand names ended up in that game, but everything else was so much fun. And that's one of the things that frustrates me about the playoffs and wanting to expand the playoffs and making everything focused on the playoffs, because Josh, like you said, the top 3 teams might be so far out in front of everybody else. Well, now if we talk about playoff expansion and access and giving the MAC champion the opportunity to play in the playoffs, that puts so much focus on winning a national championship when only a few teams can, that it makes me miss the BCS era where it was really about 2 teams having their little thing for the championship, but so much interest and focus on everything else because it was kind of a celebration of the sport and not just this hyper focus on who's going to win the national championship. What do you think?
No, I totally agree. I mean, when you talk some of these big games and big upsets that you've had, like UCF and Auburn or Boise State and Oklahoma, I think people forget that those games are games that were played between teams that weren't directly in the playoff hunt. I mean, Boise State was AP number 9. Oklahoma was AP number 7. I think it was like 6-10 for the UCF Auburn game. And those matchups in BCS bowls or New Year's Six bowls or whatever you want to call them that face 7v8, 6v9, that's what makes really fun matchups at the end of the year. And it's important that those games continue to matter because, quite frankly, at least for the preseason outlook, if we were to go to an 18 playoff, I do not like my odds of having a very exciting first round. I think the odds of Alabama, Ohio State, and Georgia destroying whoever is number 6 through number 8 are really dadgum high. And so you have a really boring first round with one good game, and then you end up in exactly the same 14 playoff that we're going to get anyway. I think that's by far the most likely result. So I would rather see, if 6 through 8 are Michigan, Oklahoma, and Baylor, I'd much rather see Michigan play a really competitive game against Oklahoma or Baylor in a bowl, and that be fun to watch, than set everything up for a playoff that where round 1 is a dud and we end up with the same group of teams that's going to win now that would win then. That just doesn't excite me. I think people like the idea of it. I don't think people would actually enjoy what it would actually be in practice.
All right, y'all. You got homework. Make sure that subscribe button is hit, that notification bell is hit, and you give us your top 10 in the comments, and we're going to mix it up with y'all and let you know how you are wrong. You can tell us how we're wrong, but obviously, since it's August, nobody's right. Thanks so much, y'all. Have a great week. God bless.